We're going to get our first off here, so if everybody could start sitting down, I'd appreciate it. All right, so I talked during the kickoff about Red Hat's unique ability, right, to bridge those open source communities and a lot of the innovation happening with the enterprise. And one of the things I'm real excited to do today is to bring up our first panel, all of which, by the way, are Red Hatters and are a great representation of the type of talent and thought leadership we believe our customers get when they enter into partnership with us. Steve's going to have a lot of the panelists do some introductions of their own, so I'm not going to go into too much depth on that. I will say, when I look at a lot of the really sharp people at Red Hat, a lot of the history, when you look at their career progression, a lot of them started earlier in their career at IBM. And I know over the last few years, you've read a lot about the Red Hat and IBM relationship. One of the exciting things about that is really kind of bridge this open source innovation model that we've been working on for 20 plus years with that traditional proprietary innovation model. And I looked up yesterday just to see kind of who was leading the patents, right? If you look at who gets granted patents every year, IBM's over 8,000 incremental patents this year, leading in terms of the company. So I really think the combination of both the companies provides our customers with a really unique perspective, and excited today to introduce Steve, Erin, Kimberly, and Derek to get the panel kicked off. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel about bringing open source innovation to your company. My name's Steve Watt. I lead the Office of the CTO at Red Hat, which is comprised of Red Hat Research, Emerging Technologies, a community for our distinguished engineers, and our open source program office. And so part of our intent in compiling this panel was to really share information with you all about how to sort of connect with us, and also for us to impart some information to provide you some agency about how to leverage open source to bring innovation to your company. So I just want to start off. I've tried to get quite a wide swath of different parts of Red Hat and how they handle innovation and co-creation here. So if you all wouldn't mind introducing yourself going sequentially and talk a little bit about who you are and what charter your organization has. Go ahead.
Okay, so good morning. My name's Erin Boyd. I'm the Director of Emerging Technologies. I actually was an engineer in Emerging Technologies and a tech lead, and I'm so super pleased to be able to lead the group now. I think it's the best job in the entire world. Going back to the first comment, I actually met Steve almost 20 years ago. We were at kind of a science fair for IBM. Where we brought our innovations to IBM Research to present to the company as fresh new engineers right out of college. So it's been an exciting ride. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Kimberly.
Sure. I'm Kimberly Craven, and I manage the Open Source Program Office at Red Hat. Been at Red Hat for 10 years now, and prior to that, been in open source. I think I attended the second open source conference in the world back in, I want to say, the 2000 timeframe. So as part of the Open Source Program Office, what we do is we work with companies, Red Hat, our customers, and our partners on how best to engage with open source communities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Derek.
Hey, everybody. I'm Derek Chan. I am the North America Field CTO. I kind of joke because I think I have like one of the widest views of Red Hat, actually. So for a long time, almost 20 years, actually 20 plus years, I was actually CIO, CTO for DreamWorks Animation. So I was actually on the customer side. So I had a really sort of good view of Red Hat. I think, we drove, RHEL 2.3 into the entertainment industry. We did other things in terms of the grid and OpenStack and OpenShift. So in terms of driving innovation at a company level using open source technology, did that for 20 years at DreamWorks Animation. And then I left DreamWorks, ended up at being a competitor of Red Hat. So I was actually at SUSE Rancher. So I've got a lot of insight into, our competitors, was part of the SUSE Rancher team, actually helping to drive a lot of that stuff. Got called by Jason, actually, and Chris Wright and Paul Cormier, and back in, I think, December of last year, maybe November of last year. And they said, oh, come over here, stop doing that Rancher stuff, come over and actually help us on the tech sales side. So I was a customer, a competitor. I joined this tech sales organization, and then recently I joined Chris's team as part of the Office of the CTO, helping to drive sort of global engineering and what we're doing on the product side. So my comment is I have the widest view because I've actually seen it as a customer, competitor, sales, and engineering, all in a sort of short little time span.
I love it. Yeah. DreamWorks certainly does bring a lot of joy to a lot of people. I'm going to just start here. So what you see up here on this is just something to look at, but this is our community.redhat.com, where you can find a lot more information about some of what Kimberly's probably going to talk about. It's not overly scripted, but Kimberly, you run our open source program office.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about how your group interacts with customers, partners, looking to navigate different open source communities and engage with them?
Sure, absolutely. So as part of the open source program office, we get consulted by our customers, and I mentioned our partners as well, on when does it make sense to participate in open source communities, and what communities should you participate in. There are from a project's perspective, it depends on the count you look at, but there are hundreds of thousands of projects out there today. How do you choose what's the right project to participate? What's the right foundation, perhaps, whether it be Apache, working with CNCF if you're interested in Kubernetes, or perhaps working with the Linux Foundation and others. There are many different choices that people can make, and it really depends on the problems that they're looking to solve, frankly. Who are you looking to, what's the problem you're looking to solve? How are you looking to collaborate? And who should you engage with? In many cases, it's working with your competitors, for example, to find the best standards-based solution as you move forward. How do you establish that community and set up the governance in a way that makes it easy for people to engage and participate? And how do you give it longevity moving forward? All right?
Yeah, I think, one of the interesting things about open source projects is it's not always easy to tell, when a project is healthy, right? And there's how do you define healthy? There's a lot of different dimensions. You may see a lot of engineering activity, but how democratic is it from participation from across the industry or multiple different companies? And so how do you help customers sort of navigate whether something's healthy or not?
So we've defined a lot of what we call recommended practices in-house, and we make them available. You can see there's a short URL on there. It's red.ht/OSPO resources. And we make things available like there's a community health checklist. So you mentioned that. There's also a guide to governance in terms of, there are actually, 1,400-ish licenses out there as well. So how do you look at what's the right licensing model to ascribe to? Or if you're working in an existing project, what is that license that you should, or what does that license mean for you and your organization? Things like that. And what's really exciting to me about this is not only are you seeing this more generically or more horizontally from an open source project perspective, but there's also an influx of industries. So we heard about GM, for example, and the in-vehicle OS, other industries as well, so manufacturing, healthcare. There are so many different flavors of open source. I like to say back in the early stages of open source, financial services and telecommunications embraced open source because of that need to establish standards. But more and more we're seeing this bridging out, and how do we provide different resources and guidance for these new entrants, if you will. Things like, does it make sense for you to have an open source program office of your own? What does that need to look like as we move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that our Red Hat open source program office can look quite different to our customers or partners. Just kind of, if you're a pure open source shop versus not, the types of things that you deal with. I'll also just say, one of the other interesting things is, these sort of enablement materials is, we at Red Hat sort of see it as a win if you're doing open source. You don't actually have to call us. if you want to collaborate upstream, we prefer it if you call us if you want to buy an open source based product. But if you want to just jump in and start exploring things, you don't have to call us upstream. Like, these enablement materials are there to give you agency, just for you to jump in and check out different open source projects.
Yeah, that's true. And I will say, even if you are interested in getting that advice, you don't necessarily have to. You don't have to pay for that engagement up front, if you will. If you're looking for a little bit of guidance, we talk with many of our customers about what they're looking to solve. For example, around smart cities and getting government agencies and others across worldwide, frankly, with you might have seen the FIWARE logo up there, helping establish best practices around things like air quality and other key focus areas for smart cities. That building out those communities to help to do those things in an open source way, and sharing that expertise is key from our perspective.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think, having talked with customers, I think there's a sort of miscommunication or misunderstanding of the difference between open source and open source that's community driven, right? And there's a big sort of stepping stone there. Like, if you have an open source project and there's only 3 or 4 people that are contributing, and it's all one company contributing, it's not the same as it's a widely dispersed community that's actually driving it. And I think I talk with a lot of companies, and they're like, well, what should we be looking for? And I think, the resources that you guys are providing really does sort of set a standard for, what should they be looking for? Because if you're going to be an enterprise and you're going to bet your company on a particular piece of technology, you want to know that there's a vibrant community out there supporting it versus, a few people, and it's driven by one company.
Right, exactly. It's funny because some of our customers actually start off by looking to share resources within their own organization, so inner source, if you will. And then they look at, how can we take this group of knowledge, because it's applicable to more than ourselves as we move forward. So that's another path that some organizations take.
Yeah, for sure. Sort of managing risk. Right? If there's no community behind an open source project, like, that's risky. But if there's 27 different organizations behind it, it's a lot less, you're exposed to a lot less risk if one of them pulls out.
Well, and I think it lends to the ethos that is Red Hat in terms of diversity. It's not only a thing around people, it's actually these communities bring in such diverse and broad use cases that actually make our technology better. And within our company, we are that itself. Our entire emerging tech team is distributed across the globe. So we're naturally able to collaborate at a level most companies can't, because we're used to talking to each other online and collaborating. So I think it's a very unique and great model.
Yeah, I think in our ethos you hear us talk about meritocracy of ideas, but that's something that I think we really enjoy getting in the co-creation model. And so you heard Chris talk a little bit about co-creation, but this is really a great way for us to sort of make sure that whatever we're cooking up upstream actually resonates and is solving real world problems. And so, the slide here you can sort of see is just a screenshot from our in-vehicle operating system joint announcement with General Motors, but it's an exemplar of sort of co-creating, right? So Kimberly spoke a little bit about co-creating and collaborating upstream, or enabling you to go by yourself upstream and pull innovation in. Derek is working in a role where he's co-creating with customers with what's in our portfolio today a lot, So Derek, could you tell us a little bit more about your experience working with customers looking to bring in open source innovation and how they go about it?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I think that, you mentioned, it's looking at some of our existing portfolio. So as much as I love looking at the emerging stuff, I think a lot of customers that we deal with today have real challenges with our existing portfolio and using them and being successful and actually going and, furthering sort of that adoption. And part of my charter right now is working with some of our most strategic customers in terms of how do they deal with it at scale? How do they deal with it, in a place where, again, the regulations are high. So working with some of the, stuff on, the financial services industry and really sort of connecting with them, but doing it in such a way that we're making it sort of visible to other people, right? So it's, while we're working on some projects, and there's a couple of engineers that we're working with, there's a couple of banks on in-place upgrades. I'll give you as an example, where we're driving, we've open sourced the project, we've put it out there. Does it solve everything? No, but it solves about 80%. And then taking that as the baseline for them to take it into their environment and essentially, extending that to what makes sense for their particular sort of environment, right? And that gets them into it, gets them faster, and really gets them to a solution much, much faster. But that ability to co-create with them and then have their sort of feedback back into the product, and then, for us then to take that open source project and actually share it with our global engineering team and say, hey, here's what the biggest, most strategic customers are using and doing, and they look at it and go, wow, that's really cool. We should incorporate it back into the product. Right? I think that was always one of the things when I was on the customer side, why would you partner with someone like Red Hat? And it's really because there's, millions of different projects out there. There's so many different things, but how do you have an influence on that? How do you help drive the direction of those things without being in the community? And really, because Red Hat has that connection to the community and can help sort of drive it at a, maintainer level and actually help influence it, that was the only way as a small company we could actually get in there and actually work towards, okay, where do we need the sort of next landing zone to be for us to land on to keep the advancement going, right? And so that whole model is really what, I've been working with our strategic customers and bring it to life. And really, that's what my charge to all of you guys. If you want that, that's what we're here for. And that's what we can help do sort of better than anybody.
Have you all seen that picture of the rope swing about requirements and then delivery, like what the customer asked for, what the product manager thought the customer asked for, what engineering thought the product manager said, and then what the customer got, right? And it's obviously like what they asked for and what they got can often be really different. And that's one of the things I think so powerful about that co-creation model is that you're able to pull the community, customer, partner in, and the way you develop it is as a partnership. It's not, sender receiver, right? And so you're tightly coupled the whole time during the development, but specifically the recipient is getting transparency and agency. So if there's an issue, you can just jump straight into the same open source project that Red Hat's making those fixes and changes in. If there's a critical bug, you can jump in and fix it yourself if you want. It's really a wonderful part of the co-creation model. So we've spoken a little bit about upstream. We've spoken bringing innovation in from upstream and how to do it and engage with it. We've spoken a little bit about how to collaborate with us for what's in our portfolio and enhance our products. I want to go a little bit to the future, right? So Erin leads the emerging technologies team, which is sort of focusing on 1+ year out from what we think the enterprise software market needs. So Erin, how does somebody engage with your team on what you're working on?
There's multiple ways that we kind of ideate both with customers and partners and communities to bring things to market. So, I think emerging tech is kind of that sweet spot where we aren't research, where it's almost sci-fi. We see the disruptive wave coming, and we're addressing the technology at that point, and then getting communities and partners involved. So, one of the examples here, which Chris touched on in his keynote, was how do we embrace that we're going to be doing computing at the edge. And one of the customers that came to us, can't mention any names, was looking to how do we utilize things like drones or satellites and be able to push data up there and feel like it's safe. This became Microshift, which is the single node offering for OpenShift. And why is that so important? It's super important because as we grow to the edge, we're talking no more about thousands of devices, but possibly millions of devices. And operating those at the edge is going to quickly become an untenable problem that we need to solve. Microchip intends to solve that because the pipeline of your development is going to be exactly the same. And then with projects like Keylime and SigStore and Recore all providing the security that we depend on end to end. We obviously don't want to put code on a satellite that goes rogue. We want to make sure that the code that we're pushing up is secure and reliable, and therefore also scales. And so one of Microchip in May actually sent up our code onto Endurance Satellite, which is providing like democratization to space through high school students able to run different environmental experiments and use OpenShift to develop those. And that was on the Falcon 9 rocket. So it was, pretty exciting. And you'll notice in the left-hand corner, there's a lot of people in the audience today that'll be your speakers from emerging tech that were able to actually see that launch and make it happen. That's one of the very kind of exciting ideas of emerging tech, but there's many more. And another way that we co-collaborate actually with our partner Intel is through one of our sustainability efforts called Kepler. So we recognized very early this year that we needed to create a whole separate team within emerging tech that was solely focused on sustainable issues. And the first part of that is, how do we consistently capture the information to be able to report on it? So first we need to be able to capture it. Different vendors capture that power information differently. Then how do we report it? Kepler is creating the standardization and then doing the reporting on that. And then the emergent part of that as well is, how do we then help enterprises make decisions given this data to be able to run their data centers, run their jobs more efficiently and effectively and within the carbon footprint that they desire. So that's where we aspire to really bring to the enterprise something truly meaningful that's going to change their business. When you're talking about running billions of devices, saving 5% of the power consumption at that level is going to be substantial. So, it started as an upstream project. I've now helped foster in a new CNCF tag for sustainability that within that community is leading this project globally to be able to produce real projects and real results to bring to our customers. Those are two great ways that we're able to talk to partners and customers, but also really work with the broader community of engineers who are passionate about these and bring them to the enterprise.
Okay, so if you're sitting in the audience and like, wow, that's cool, how do I engage or find out more about these projects? Where would they go?
So next.redhat.com is our blog, which we talk about a lot of the projects we're going on. And as you'll see in the breakout sessions this afternoon, most everyone has a disclaimer at the front of their thing. Like, this is emergent. We're not sure when it'll come to market. And so, we talk about the different technologies there. And really what that's meant to do is put that spark of imagination and dream out to the communities, out to our customers to know what is possible and show that we're thinking forward for them and to get involved, to join those communities, to engage with us. And, there's a catalog of all the projects that we've done there. And we move very rapidly, as Chris pointed out. We're small teams doing, POCs, making sure that these things are actually, we can deploy them in the enterprise. They work with the products that are on the truck, to Derek's point, and really deliver full end-to-end solutions in this area very quickly.
Okay, so the next.redhat.com is where you can go if you're interested in engaging in any of these projects or want to find out who to actually reach out to, who's leading the project, to go collaborate on them. Most of them have, the GitHub repos where you can just jump in directly on those. Just another area I thought that would be quite interesting to talk about, since it touches both, communities, capabilities in our current portfolio right now, as well as long-term technology, is the fact that computational infrastructure and how it's changing, right? And so, I think that the current generation of architectures are finding it increasingly hard to handle all demands of the workload within the CPU and computers being offloaded to increasingly exotic devices. Can you talk a little bit about your computational infrastructure team and kind of what they're doing to tackle this problem?
I would love to. I actually started my career in hardware. I worked on print controllers, which IBM made printers, if no one knew that. So, I started off doing assembly code. So to think that hardware is relevant again is super exciting to me. So it used to be within, huge cloud providers or even private clouds. It was good enough to rubber stamp, the data center, that you had one single BOM and you use that across the fleet. We're quickly realizing at scale that's not realistic, and we want to be able to put GPUs where we need GPUs and not put GPUs where we don't need them. And so the promise of our open programmable infrastructure, OPI, that Chris Murphy, the lead, is building a community around, that's just been announced by the Linux Foundation, is actually to abstract that out so we can more effectively use these exotic different compute devices we need to either do AI on the edge or test out new silicon, all of those things, that this standard will provide a means that we can do that through an API efficiently. This is providing both cost savings and advantages to our customers who are, using AI in their everyday life to make real world decisions. So, that's one of our teams that's forward looking, with the advent of ARM as well, which is still kind of the wild, wild west. It's meant to address, that market is quickly coming to fruition, that's not something we can ignore. As AWS has Nitro in there, we're also looking at RISC-V, further looking. So we're looking at all these different technologies in terms of hardware that are coming out, and how can we actually make it feasible for customers to use them with more broadly within the enterprise, depending on their needs.
Yeah. And then, Derek, are you sort of seeing anything in the field with people deploying RHEL on these increasingly exotic devices?
For sure. I think people are looking at, the edge and looking at that as an opportunity to, and I think Chris pointed out well, which is, the amount of data, the amount of processing that's going on at the edge is really sort of a game changer and an inflection point, I think, for lots of different industries, right? Whether it's sort of automotive or telco or manufacturing, right? There's so many different opportunities, and, when you're looking at all of these opportunities, I think the question is, who do you partner with and who do you work with to help sort of suss out who's real, who's not, where the things are going. And again, I think we have a long sort of history with that.
Yeah. Can I get a supported operating system on this pretty new class of computational device?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to move to Q&A. We have some questions that we're just, because this is a hybrid event, if there are any questions from outside, we're just going to tackle those first, and then take any questions if there are any from the audience. Do we have any? Okay.
Hello. Okay. Our first question is from Dan Lineback. For the panel, what do you think are the most exciting new open source projects that get you excited, not necessarily part of Red Hat's core portfolio?
Wow, there's so many. So, just in full disclosure, I'm on the CNCF-TOC, so I get to see, projects continuously come into the ecosystem, both from a sandbox level, which is like nascent new projects that are a couple people working on them, to fully graduated projects. And what I'm actually seeing within the ecosystem that I think is exciting is a couple projects. One is from Ollie Cloud, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's around operations and the embracement of open services and open SRE practices. For a long time, we were hyper-focused on the developer experience, and we absolutely still are. Microchip's a perfect example. I want to develop on a single platform, and I want to run that end-to-end. But, in moving to services, and open services especially, we have to have projects and a paradigm shift to how do we actually deliver these things, function these things, and make sure they're reliable and stable as a service end to end. And so, I'm quickly seeing a lot of projects come out of open source that we're not directly contributing to now that really are trying to address that. So.
you have any
Okay.
thoughts?
And we have one more question online.
Just hold on. I just wanted to just add a thought on that. If you either.
Right ahead.
I think another thing, mine's a little more abstract. It's a little bit more societal, but it's sort of a riff on that, which is if you look at open source, it sort of led the charge on, democratizing package software, software that you could pull down and download and run. And I think we'd all agree that today, like the way we consume software, a lot of it has become way more consumption of services, right? And that's historically, we've always had this sort of transparency and agency as an individual. With open source package software, we can just go fix a bug or add a feature or read the source, where that's sort of disappeared with the consumption of these increasingly proprietary commercial SaaS offerings. So one of the projects I'm pretty interested in, mainly from a societal standpoint, because it's again about democratization, is open services and these operate first principles, where basically what if we have open source services where the community is not sort of just building the core capability, but they're also open sourcing the operationalization of that service. And there's a community that's figuring out how to expose it as an API, handle, outages, put in all the automation so that when there's a failure that there's no operational downtime, but it recovers, things like that. So I think that's a pretty interesting space for us as an industry if we could get to that.
If I can build on that, one of the things that I'm seeing that's really interesting is in the public sector, again, it's this whole concept of how do we, if there's a grant, for example, that allows us to fund helping emerging countries with establishing that digital infrastructure, how do we make that sustainable moving forward after the grant goes away? These are the big problems that a lot of our government agencies are looking at worldwide. And that whole concept of, in essence, making that available and democratizing the capabilities so that others can benefit is exciting.
Okay.
Thank you. Another question from the online audience. What do you think about open source hardware platforms, and do you see them becoming more part of the enterprise?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I think open hardware is a huge next piece of where we move to. As Steve alluded to, as Moore's Law is kind of ending, we're coming up with new ways that aren't necessarily just CPUs, GPUs, DPUs, IPUs, ARM, so those things are definitely becoming more open. And if you have a chance to go to Chris and Steve Royer's presentation on OPI, they're actually going to show a physical demo of hardware that's, in that space. So.
Yeah, and I'd also add, if you go to research.redhat.com, you can see research work by a gentleman called Ahmed Sanala that he's created a whole FPGA toolchain where you can flash an FPGA and put a RISC-V processor on it, and he's like exponentially reduced the burn time to actually get that to work or produce that. And so we've got some sort of, research is a little like 3+ years out from the early majority application. It's a little further out, but like we're very much looking at, all these exotic devices that are sort of coming out, including, it's not that, like if you look at a DPU, it's something that goes in the PCIe slot of a server, but the main difference between that and a far edge device is the far edge device has its own power, and so they're really similar things, so we're sort of looking across the broad spectrum and trying to figure out abstractions that can work across both, and it's no longer your sort of x86 pizza box,
We'll take some questions from the audience, and I can throw you guys the catch box, which is pretty cool.
It's soft, so if you get hit.
Yeah, I won't chuck it at you. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand, and I'll bring the catch box over.
Yeah, question over here.
Awesome. 1 second.
She's coming with the microphone.
That way all the virtual attendees can hear your great questions. Ready? Think fast.
So you talk into the top of it. It's the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Hi. Thank you very much. It was very interesting knowledge about the micro shift. Can you please give a couple of examples or use cases where you applied the micro shift successfully?
I didn't catch the last
A couple of use cases where we're planning on using microshift. Is that right?
Yes.
Wow, there's more than a couple use cases where microshift is super relevant. Certainly within telco, it's appropriate. I mean, beyond, just putting microshift into satellites, our telco, they're all interested in running millions of edge devices with the advent of 5G. Microshift becomes very relevant there because then they can, run some of the same workloads on-prem or out and have a cohesive pipeline beginning and ending.
Yeah, retail stores.
Retail, yeah.
Retail stores, unmanned vehicles, which really covers a lot of things, like a drone's an unmanned vehicle.
Right.
There's lots of other kinds of unmanned. Things like robotic automation.
Factories, yeah. I mean, anywhere that there's an edge device, microshift.
Yeah, I think there was. I heard of one where there was like a city that was looking at replacing all of their light posts with sort of smart sensors, right? So smart sensors in the light posts that could then be used to triangulate different response to emergency, actions and stuff like that as well. I think that's a pretty interesting use case.
Yeah, I'd say what's interesting about it is, it's got the problem with like having something far edge device which you like screw into the sheetrock in your train station is that like it's quite vulnerable to getting physically exploited. So there's a lot of kind of what we're doing around security around edge is a couple of things. How can you tell remotely if the actual operating system that's running on the things like on an SD card and somebody like powered it down, switches the SD card, puts a different one on when there's nobody at the train station at 2 a.m. There's that sort of problem which Keyline tackles, but then there's other aspects of like, okay, if all your edge devices get exploited, they're all over the place, and they get bricked or something like that, that's extremely onerous to go and fix in all those different locations. So admission controllers in Kubernetes that check, are you allowed to deploy this, run this software? Where's the software coming from? All of those things are any use case that would benefit from updating software but verifying where it's coming from and then being able to deploy it from a single sort of command center out to the fleet is a use case that's a good use case for microshift.
Well, and I quickly want to plug Frank here sitting in the front, who will be doing a talk talking about microshift and all these different use cases. But it jogged my mind on one other piece is that, a critical piece of that update, if you did have 1,000 devices suddenly bricked, is network. And so people don't always think about network being an emergent technology, but it absolutely is. And Dave Tucker, I don't know where he is in the audience, is going to be talking about eBPF and what innovations we're doing in that space as well to reduce the overhead of actually having that communication. So, just to plug the talks, all this becomes a cohesive story, and if you don't have the chance to actually see each of these talks in person, I encourage you to go back and watch them to get kind of the complete story.
There's a question over here.
Okay,
the first gentleman won a pair of socks for asking the first question, so I'll get that to you after.
Good throw. Just on that note, on the evolution of networks, everything that's been talked about is, in terms of the network, is we've made some presumptions here, that the networks are from the service providers, there's public networks, etc., including, but not limited to what's on the slide here. There isn't a physical network there, right? But what about the thoughts around as we evolve into private networks, and what are some of the communities, and what are some of the innovations that we're looking at in those spaces? Because that's going to considerably change some of the aspects that you were talking about in terms of privacy, in terms of the availability of services and what we can accomplish there.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of enterprises that have extremely proprietary networks that are tightly coupled with identification and security. So how do we kind of disaggregate those separation of concerns and actually deliver something that's open? And that's something that we're actively working on. And so, there's a couple different sides of that. eBPF is quickly related to network, but it's much more than that, and it's still very nascent. You know, of course, Isovalent, you know, is created more of a proprietary model to sell to customers, and you know, looking to the community, we're saying there isn't a lot here where we would feel comfortable. There's no tooling, there's no support, there's no documentation. So, you know, kind of the first point of that is, what can it deliver? Can we validate those promises it's deliver? And can we make it open in tooling so we can have more engineers actually contributing to that base? So that's kind of part of taking those proprietary things apart and actually delivering them to a wider community. And then with identification and security, you know, that's Luke Hines, I don't know where he is, he'll also be doing a talk, you know, around the different things that we're looking at in terms of how do we deliver secure supply chain, and part of that is on the network, right? So, Derek, you look like you were wanting to add something.
Well, actually,
Okay.
I was actually going to sort of prompt, so one private network that's quite interesting, which is around controlling the quality of an experience, is Metaverse. And so I was curious whether either of you two have seeing any interests or developments in that area?
I mean, I think that, you know, sort of private networks, clearly a lot of our customers are dealing with that, and, you know, very successfully, but it's very challenging. I think on the, you know, metaverse and even on the entertainment side, you know, being create sort of curated experiences has always been sort of one of the sort of goals, is to, like, how do you make that experience, right? Yeah, you can get, you know, entertainment to your set top in your house or your mobile device, but how do you turn that into something a little bit more sort of curated for an individual or for a particular experience? And a lot of that has to do with separate networks and being able to deliver technology into those environments so that it's, you know, something special.
Well, and with hybrid cloud, how do we deliver that so customers have the flexibility? I mean, we have to be able to cross those boundaries within the network and not have customers have to completely rewrite their applications to do that. And it is very challenging, but it's definitely something that we strive to deliver, you know, as part of our platform, is crossing those boundaries seamlessly, ideally through, you know, new network technologies.
So just so one of the things that we're involved in, I hope I'm getting this right, but there's like an open metaverse foundation that we're tracking, I would say, and then you know, we have had some customer and partner meetings about sort of the technology required and involved, and we have sort of had some internal consensus discussions on technology strategy around kind of what that stack would look like to deliver a kind of experience. What we're seeing a lot of is sort of fledgling open source upstream community, but sort of a lot of the downstream more commercial offerings. So seeing a lot of partnerships to where a network provider is working with somebody who's an augmented reality provider to create a specific kind of experience around the thing. I think it's really interesting, you know, and it's a lot of people sort of tie it quite closely together to Web3, but I actually think they're related but distinct. Yeah, so it's a space that in the office of the CTO we're paying close attention to. So unfortunately, that ends our time. But you can come hunt us down in the hallways. We're happy to geek out about this stuff, and appreciate you all attending.
All right, so before I do some announcements for lunch in the afternoon, I just wanted to share two perspectives that came to mind during this great panel. So the first one is, having been at Red Hat 12 years, we've definitely seen a pretty clear pattern in how our customers engage with us and with open source, right? So the first stage is typically consumption, right? They want to use something that comes out of an open source community. The second one is, as they mature a little, they want to contribute, right? And the third one is influence. And I think when you think about the consume, contribute, and influence dynamic, like really what we got to hear today was the early stage of a supply chain for really innovative software. And to keep it kind of close to home for Texas, so having been at Red Hat 12 years, before that I was at Dell. And what was Dell known for differentiation, right? It was the direct from Dell supply chain model. So when I started working or considering Red Hat, everything I viewed open source and Red Hat about was, hey, this is a very effective and efficient way to make great software. But I don't think I had an appreciation for then, which I do now, and obviously was reminded of it during the panel, is your level of influence in the community is directly correlated to your contribution. Right? So the reason why Red Hat's had so much success in open source communities is because of the level of engagement and contribution. And you can see that in how we've noticed before many others in the industry, right, of shifts like the Zen hypervisor moving to KVM, or, you know, the advent of OpenStack. You've seen it with, you know, the container management and container orchestration market. Like, I get asked a lot by customers, well, you got real lucky picking Kubernetes so early. You know, we did that around 2000, you know, well, first iteration of OpenShift was 2011, but Kubernetes was a little bit after that. We didn't do that just because Red Hat's so smart, right? We did that because of our level of engagement that we work with those communities, and then in essence with our customers. So really appreciate the perspectives from the technology, the ecosystem with Kimberly, and then with Derek in the CTO role talking to our customers. All right, so on to the announcements. So we've got a survey here. We'd love to hear from you. There's a survey that will talk about some of the panelists, the keynote, and then obviously the breakouts. We have a lunch from 12:30 to 1:30. So just make sure after lunch you get into the breakout sessions, because I think a lot of what the early sessions were the vision and the collaboration and engagement, whereas the meat of what the signal is going to come through those different breakouts. And then again, a reminder, we have Spot the robot at the happy hour. And I thought to myself this morning, my wife and I just bought a house, and the realtor we used was from a different state, and he sent me an email. It was a picture of his German Shepherd and him. He was kneeling down next to the German Shepherd, and he took a picture. And I noticed attorneys do the same thing. Real estate and attorneys, they take pictures with their dog. They use it on their business card. Why not, if you're in IT, take a picture with Spot, the robot dog, and put it on your social media? So great opportunity for all of us to do that. Thanks again for your engagement this morning, and we'll see you after lunch.
Thank you.